Hey guys, how's it going? So here we're starting off with our statistics class. We're not going to go ahead and delve in too much into a lot of things that maybe students will be able to learn just by reading the information. So for example, a lot of information from chapter 1 is kind of information that you just read through and make sure you understand it. And it's basically statistical thinking, statistical ideas, concepts, words even. But most of our reviews are going to be things that we can actually practice, things that I can give you practice problems for. And just to go ahead and test to make sure that you're understanding not only the concept but also the way to calculate and derive and predict and all the other things that come up with statistics. So let's go ahead and start off with graphing qualitative data. So here we have kind of our worksheet, and qualitative data is the data which includes observations that are grouped. And so these groupings can be some examples I have up here: colors, different car makes, gender even though that's just one and one, it's still grouping. Grade level even though they're numbers, you're actually still grouping by juniors, seniors, or maybe even high school, graduates, graduate school, stuff like that. And there are two pieces of information that are associated with qualitative variables. So one of them that we can extract from qualitative variables is the frequency. And this is just the number of observations within each group. So for example, if we had a graduating class, maybe we could have 300 females, 200 males, right? And so that would be frequency. It's the number of observations within each group or each category that we're interested in. Now, relative frequency is the proportion of observations. Proportion, and actually another way you can say this too, proportion is kind of the fancy way of saying it, but we can also say percentage as well. That's something that people are a little more used to. And so proportion or percentage of observations within each category. So not only can we have that there were 300 females, 200 males, we can also say out of the total group of 500, what percent were females, what percent were males. And so the way we do this is the frequency for each particular group. And so let me go ahead and write that. The frequency for each group divided by the total sample. So how many total people were involved in this? How many total cars? How many total houses? How many total whatever object or thing we're interested in was involved in this whole process or in this grouping. So then multiply that by 100% and we can get not only just the relative frequency but also the percentage. But that's just a similar concept to just something you may have learned earlier. Just multiply by 100% and that gives you the percentage rather than just the proportion itself. So, two types of graphs can help you display this qualitative data. We have bar graphs and also pie charts. And so these, again, also may have been familiar. You might have seen them back in grade school. So pie charts are only used to see how large of a chunk one group is from the whole pie. When I say chunk and pie, I kind of mean just, these are kind of colloquial words. These are words that I kind of like using to describe them. Because essentially, the bar graph kind of gives you a general view of everything versus the pie chart tells you kind of how much is each group taking out of the entire sample size, right? So for example, again, going back to the 300 females graduating, 200 males graduating, what percentage of females is taking up the whole 500 people who did graduate? So here's a bar graph, and right next to it is a pie chart, and here we see that we have the frequency or relative frequency on the y-axis, right? So this is the y-axis here, and the x-axis. Now the x-axis is always going to have the categories or groups that we're focusing on. And so here in this particular example, we just have 4 groups. I haven't really named them. It doesn't really matter what the names are. I'm just going to say group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. Just to make our lives easier, right? Because we're going to have practice problems to kind of develop our skills a little bit. But for now, just visually, group 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so we see that group 1 and 4 are frequency-wise at the same height, right? So that means they're taking up the same number of observations, and also those observations take up an equal amount of the total pie. And this is where we're talking about percentages and relative frequency. And then 3 is a little lower, so it's a little less, and then 2 is even less. And so we see that size basically equals the frequency, right? And so the bigger the bar is, the more observations there are within that particular group. Does that make sense? And also the relative frequency is going to follow the same kind of breakdown. It's going to have the same proportion of heights because we're still talking about frequency or number of observations within each group, but then we just divide it by the total sample size. So still going to look the same, just the numbers are a little different. So now let's move on to the pie chart. The pie chart, instead of these frequencies and relative frequencies, a lot of times pie charts come with percentages. And so we already mentioned earlier, just multiply the relative frequency by 100%, and that gives you the percentage within each group. So here we see that we have group 1, group 2, group 3, and group, let's put that in red because you can't see it, and group 4. Right? And so these groups represent the same kind of breakdown as the bar graph. It's just a different visual representation. And so again, like I said, the pie chart is really just to see how much does, for example, group 1 take out of the whole chunk of the other groups, all added together, right? Versus the bar graph kind of tells you, kind of relative to each other, what do they look like, as opposed to out of the whole thing, how much does group 1 take? So here, group 1 and group 4, we can see that just like the bars are equal in heights, these little sectors or these chunks of the pie are relatively the same, right? So group 1 and group 4, again, the size of this chunk of a pie is respective of the frequency. So this kind of ties into both of these. The size of the bars tells you the frequency, and also the size of the little chunks of pie also tell you the frequency relative to each other. And then those are going to come along with percentages, and you go ahead and put all that information within the pie chart just so that someone's able to tell which group takes what percentage of the whole pie. So let's go ahead and move on. So the way we do this, I just wrote 3 simple steps. It's not very difficult to come up with these bar graphs and pie charts. The first is to create a table with the categories and their frequencies. So go ahead and list all the categories that we have, and then the frequency for each particular category. So how many observations are in each category, right? Now, if you had to create a pie chart or a relative frequency histogram, then you have to do an extra step, and that extra step is calculating relative frequencies so that you can see not only just the literally number of observations, but you have to also see the proportion of how much does each group take out of the entire sample size. So you would take calculate a relative frequencies column, and then you would draw bars or sections, kind of like those little pie sections, whose size are relative to the value of the frequency or relative frequency that we're talking about. So I said a lot of words. Let's go ahead and just try and practice this out. So example 1, draw a frequency bar graph and a pie chart for the following data. So we have our categories, right? Our categories are car makes, and then frequency is literally how many people own each of those different car makes. So we can go ahead and stop there, but we also need to calculate a relative frequency, right? Because we're doing a pie chart. So categories, frequency. Now let's do the relative frequency. So relative frequency is the number of observations in that group divided by the total. How do we get the total sample size, however? The way we do that is we have the frequency within each category, right? So if we just add those up, we can get the total number of people or cars or whatever the case may be were involved in making this data set. So 10 plus 20 is 30, 35, and another 15 makes it a total of 50 observations. You see that? So 50 total observations. Now a relative frequency, all we do is just frequency divided by that 50. So 10 over 50, 20 over 50, 5 over 50, and 15 over 50. But we can't just leave it as that. We have to write out the proportion. And if you want, percentage works totally fine. All it really is just shifting the decimal over a little bit. And so we'll do that at the end. So 10 over 50 is 0.2, or 0.20. 20 over 50 is 0.40, right? It's just double that. 5 out of 50 is 0.10. And 15 out of 50 is 0.30. Now, one way you can check to make sure that you're doing this correctly is that if these are all chunks of the pie, they should all add up to the total pie, right? What should the total pie add up to in terms of relative frequencies? They should add up to 100%, right? Or 1. So we can go ahead and check that to make sure that that's true. And it is. It's 0.2 and 0.4 is 0.6. Add 0.10, that's 0.7. And add another 0.3, that's 1.0. Or essentially 100% of our total sample size. So we're good in that respect. And now if you want, we can go ahead and calculate percentages. So we just multiply by 100%, and that gives us 20%, 40%, 10%, and 30%. It's just shifting over the decimal place two ways, right? All we do is do, right? So shift it over 2, add a little percent sign at the end. Shift it over 2, add a little percent sign at the end. Good. So let's go ahead and start drawing. Let's get to it. So let's do our histogram for, bar graph. Look at me getting ahead of myself. Let's do our bar graph. And so we have we're going to have to break down our data a little simpler just for space. So space-wise, let's go ahead and say Toyota is T, Nissan is N, Honda is H, and Ford is F. So Toyota, Nissan, Honda, and Ford. And so there's going to be some space in between these because they're not actually kind of grouped together. They're not sections of kind of some continuous thing. They're just literally Toyota, Nissan, Honda, and then Ford, right? So they're totally separate. They shouldn't be touching. They're regarding totally different groups. So Toyota, we have 10. So how do we go ahead and write out the 10? First off, let's set a scale so that we know what's our maximum and what are each respective kind of little scales. So 20 is going to be our maximum, and we're breaking this down by 5s. 5 seems the easiest because literally our data is broken down into 5s. So let's do 5, 10, 15, and 20. So 5, 10, 15, and 20. I'm going to space that out a little more. So once we have this little scale ready to go, all we do is just draw bars that are the heights that correspond to them, right? So Toyota, we're at 10 owners, so we should draw a bar that goes up to 10. Crazy concept. Nissan has 20, go up to 20. Honda has how much? Honda's got 5. Oh, that's sad. And then Ford is 15. And these are totally made up numbers, guys. Not really respective of anything. So here's Toyota, Nissan, let's say Ford, and Honda. Cool. So we got our little bar graph. Wow, it's very colorful. So we got our bar graph. Let's go ahead and now translate that information. So we did frequencies. Now let's do relative frequencies to get our pie graph. So let's draw a circle. Do your best. It's very decent, not bad. So we have 20%, 40%, 10%, and 30%. 30% is about a third, and it doesn't have to be exact, right? We're not computers. We're not graphing calculators. We're here to kind of just sketch so that we know and we understand what our graph is supposed to represent, what it looks like, and kind of what the relative sizes should be, right? So I'm going to start with a 30% just because I think of a peace sign. Peace is about breaking it down into 3/4, and so it's about 33%. So let's say it's like that, right? It's like a third of a peace sign. So that one is 30%. And that corresponds to what? It's going to be Ford, right? Next, we have, let's do the 40%. It's going to be a little bigger than the 30%, right? So 30% would be a peace sign still, but we're going to do a little more than that. So I'm going to say about that much. So this is 40%, and the 40% corresponds to which category? It's going to be Nissan, right? Now we only have 2 more. And these are broken down into 20% and 30%. So basically, one is twice as big as the other one. So I'm going to just say a third of it is 1, and the remainder is the other one. So here's 10%, right? 20%. And now the 10% corresponds to Honda, the 10% corresponds to Honda, I'm sorry, and the 20% corresponds to Toyota. So Nissan gets the yellow. Ooh, get crazy. Then we have Toyota. Toyota gets the blue. Then we have Honda. Is green. Wow, this looks very, very amateur sketch, but it's okay. And then Ford gets the last color. So 30. You can hardly see the 30% anymore. Awesome. So there we have it, our bar graphs and pie charts, how we do that. We get frequencies, relative frequencies, which are two types of information that we can pull from qualitative data. We'll do a practice set just to kind of get our feet wet with what are different forms of questions that can be asked about this, and how do we, just keep going on graphing bar graphs and pie charts. So thank you for your time. Hopefully you guys join us for the practice set and future reviews. Take care.